Well, welcome to Chapter 1 and also a short overview about the chapter. Most of these I'll do my best to keep to 15 minutes or less. That's my goal. No guarantees, but I'll do my best. The first chapter asks you to consider the difference between or why sport nutrition is really important. And I'll tell you that the interesting thing about sport nutrition is that it utilizes what you learn in exercise physiology and the metabolism and the energy systems and allows you to apply it to nutrition or apply nutrition to that understanding. So it's how can you fuel best for recovery, for performance and preparation, and of course in reverse order. Sport nutrition has a lot of growth ahead of it. We would think that people have a clear understanding about how to eat, but boy, oh boy, we do not. We are still needing to do better at that area. So there are opportunities, and it is something that is an interesting field if you were to pursue being able to utilize your knowledge. A registered dietitian is an individual who has completed a academic program and they have also taken an exam, they've completed an internship, and there's quite a bit of education and understanding about biochemistry and chemistry and as a whole. And the number of positions or where you can have positions could be specialized or it could be more general in a wide variety of settings. A nutritionist does not typically have a college degree requirement, but a nutritionist does not have a licensure. There's also no credential that I'm aware of that's available for a nutritionist. A dietitian does have a credential. Does a dietitian need to have a credential? And the answer is yes, they do. Can you give nutrition advice? Well, you can give nutrition advice because there's no registered dietitians in this class, I don't believe. And you can give guidance on general public domain information. You're going to look at not making recommendations outside of what is specifically available for all individuals. Now, there will be some adjustments that you'll be able to make, but there are some limitations, and that has to do with the scope of practice. The scope of practice is when you have a level of responsibility associated with your field. Now, a dietitian, a registered dietitian, has nutritional guidelines of what they can give recommendations for. A nutritionist, you got to stay in your lane. You cannot make recommendations if individuals need information that is not available to just the general public. When you should refer someone to a registered dietitian is when that individual has a specific need for guidance if you suspect they might have an eating disorder, a medical condition, a issue with goodness sakes, if they're pregnant or lactating, hypertension. If it's something outside of the healthy individual, then we need to refer to someone that's their level of expertise. The rest of the chapter has to do with regular nutrients, and the nutrients are going to be examined individually, but we're going to keep in mind that they do have a lot of overlap, and we don't just eat a food that is pure one thing. We tend to eat foods that have a combination of nutrients. And the nutrients all have recommended intakes that we're going to look at, and also a relationship of when and how to the amounts to consume. So carbohydrates, macronutrient, we know that they're made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and they have a caloric value of 4 kcals per gram. I have a pet peeve when people say a no carbohydrate diet, because carbohydrates are needed, and we can have carbohydrates consumed in fruits, vegetables, and grains. Proteins are amino acids. We primarily get those in dairy and some vegetables and animal meats. They do have energy of 4 kcals per gram, but our body doesn't like to use protein during exercise. It's more important for growth and repair and development. You'll see the addition of nitrogen on a protein is what makes it unique. Fats or lipids have a caloric value of approximately 9 kcals per gram. We find that in animal products, dairy products, and also in our other, you'll find it in some grains too. There's a small amount of lipid in the structures. We do know that they're the same backbone of carbon with hydrogen and oxygen as carbohydrates, but a much more dense caloric food. Vitamins are another chapter. Those are necessary for a vital process. We get those in our diet primarily in fruits and vegetables. Minerals we need to have for nervous conduction, electrical conduction, for muscle contraction, for energy metabolism, for energy production. So minerals are necessary. We have major and minor requirements, and you'll see the major requirements we need in a larger amount, and that's the same for macro and micronutrients too. So larger requirements or smaller requirements. And we'll look at these individually. Water is our major necessity. We have to have water every day. We can go much longer without food than we can without water. For temperature regulation, we know that we'll overheat. We have to make sure that we have fluid for production of energy and transportation of nutrients and waste and byproducts. We'll spend some time looking at the recommended dietary allowances, and that is the big umbrella. Underneath it are individual guidelines that we have. We know that the recommended dietary allowances are really the first ones, and then as we learn more and more and more about what's necessary, we have a slight different terminology. This is right from your chapter. You'll see that the RDA is now what the RDA, the dietary referenced intake, includes everything, and the RDA is what we have that's going to be enough for almost all the general population. It's based upon age, gender, or I should say sex, and pregnancy and lactation. So we have greater needs for different stages in life, or in different, if a person might be pregnant or they're breastfeeding. But that RDA is based on meeting the needs for about 98, nearly everyone of the healthy population. When we get to these smaller subcategories, we're looking at vitamins and minerals primarily. Estimated average requirement, that would be what's the intake for half of the individuals in that category. Adequate intake is for, what's the, if you don't know specifically what the adequate amount is, there's not enough literature or research. It's called an adequate intake. And what becomes maybe more important in some cases is what is the tolerable limit. If an intake above the upper limit can cause some adverse effects, and that can happen with certain vitamins, especially like fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin E. The guidelines are what we can follow as a nutritionist. The guidelines give us a scientific basis of our nutrients. It's a great starting point for athletes. We'll look at the Choose My Plate or My Plate, and you'll see that those are our primary, our food groups. We could argue about dairy. We can get calcium from other resources. You might hear my dog snore. That's not me. But it helps to get a guide for people to be able to get their nutritional needs. We utilize the food label, and at some point down the road, we'll be looking at more food labels. The Food and Drug Administration oversee food labels. They've changed over time. The latest update, I think, was for 2022. We know who's made it, so where it's come from. We know what is in that box. We know whether or not how it's meeting the nutritional guidelines, and it also provides a list of ingredients based upon weight. So if the first ingredient is sugar, you know by weight that's what the biggest contributor to that is. So when I look at spices, I'll see salt as the first, especially with salt mixes. It'll say salt as the first ingredient, and then sugar as the next, and then it'll have a mixture of herbs and spices. But that's how you know that the base is salt, and then sugar, and then down the road it's some other things. If you're gluten intolerant, or if you have a food allergy, that's what a nutrition label provides us with, that information for safety. From the food label, we get the nutritional information about how big is the serving size, what am I getting in that serving size, how are the macronutrients contributing to that food, and how is it meeting my individual demands or requirements. That new label is the one in the center. It's the revised label, and you can see that it's changed even from one way ago in terms of just telling how many calories. We've moved from individual calories by each macronutrient, and we are looking at grams, and how does this meet a general 2,000 calorie diet, which is the starting point. As we move forward and look at the readings, we'll do some application and have some problem solving. We're going to look at what when we make recommendations, there's more to it than just saying, here are the guidelines. Someone might be traveling, they might not have access to a refrigerator. How are we going to how are we going to get their protein in? Someone has multiple games during the day. How are we going to make sure they stay hydrated, that they have access to food? Someone might not have, maybe they're cycling. Like I've just watched the Tour de France. They're going 100 kilometers or this crazy distance in a day. They ride for 5 hours. How are they going to stay hydrated and their nutrition maintained? Because if they don't, they're not going to be able to go up that Alp. So there's quite a bit of tweaking that goes along with developing an athlete's nutritional plan than just looking at the guidelines. So with that, be sure to read Chapter 1, familiarize yourself with the terminology so you can move forward, and I'll see you in Chapter 2.